Let me start by quoting the female that almost became president of the United States in 2016. Women are the primary victims of war. Women lose their fathers, husbands, and their sons in combat. Now let that sink in for a moment. This is a feminist that says it. So men who go to war to fight, to be injured, to be killed, their suffering is irrelevant because women are the primary victims of war. Makes sense, right? Now, I wanted to present that quote just to give an impression of the signs of our times, to put it this way, and where equality has really brought us. One of the darker sides of so-called equality is paternity fraud. Now, perhaps not many of you have heard about this, or paternity misrepresentation, which essentially means that a woman gets pregnant and she's misrepresenting who the father of the child is. So as a result, there are laws in place in practically all of the Western countries to different degrees, whereby if you are married, then by default, if your wife gets pregnant and gets a child, you are by law the father, right? And in most cases, in most countries, you cannot call that into question legally anytime thereafter. So essentially, even though if your wife had an affair and you're not the father and the child is born and you figure out that's probably not mine, legally you are the guardian, you're subject to child support payments until the child becomes an adult. And well, if you want to say the most egregious part of it is that countries such as France and Germany have bans on DNA testing. So if there's a couple who gets a child and the father is suspecting that it might not be his, DNA testing of the child is illegal and punishable to up to 15,000 euros. So that should make you wonder of like, how do you, like, you're adding insult to injury. Like imagine, and then the best part of it is that the people who justify the presence of said legislation say men are insecure because they doubt their paternity. And then two, even if their doubts would be confirmed by a DNA test, that would disturb the peace in society because that would have an influence on the family structure, and the fathers would in most cases want to disown their child or children. And what I find the craziest part of it is that all of this makes sense from a female perspective. Sure, if she had an affair, most likely, most likely, she had an affair with a man that's either better looking, taller, more intelligent, more successful, but in some sort of way superior to the man that she claims is the father, who's essentially the cock. It's very rare that a woman would have sex with a man outside of the relationship who is of lesser quality as a man than the cock. But in all of this discussion, whenever a male perspective is presented, such as this is one of the, if not the worst thing a woman can do to a man is to trick the man to believe that this child is yours when it's not. So the man is putting his time, effort, energy, love, resources into the child for potentially many years, only to discover that, oh, by the way, it's not mine. And at this point, there's certainly some women who might say, well, if, who cares who's the biological father? After all, if he has gotten to know the child, he's been there to provide and protect for years, and they've grown close, then that's the only thing that should matter. When somebody says that, generally it's a woman or a simp or a cuck. They utterly overlook the biological imperative of every man, which is to reproduce. That's what we're put on this planet to do, essentially. And when you deprive a man of his biological imperative, which is to continue his lineage, if you want to use the female equivalent of such a profound violation of your rights, I could say, um, yeah, let's decriminalize grape and see how that feels like for women. Because that's the female equivalent of women being deprived of their biological imperative, which is sexual selection. Because grape essentially is taking away the power for women to select the mate they want to have kids with. But if you say that we should decriminalize um, grape, and that's the female equivalent, women would lose their minds. They'd be like, no way, you're crazy, it's not the same. Well, ask a man in sincerity how he feels about being the subject of paternity fraud. He will be disgusted on a very profound level. So I also appreciate that when it comes to the psychology and the physical part of, let's say, grape, a man cannot understand that to the same degree as a woman experiences it. But similarly, the male equivalent of being the subject of paternity fraud, women cannot really understand that. Because when a woman has a child, the child, more often than not, becomes the number one focus and priority in her life. And whatever the father thinks, it's nice to know, but it's not as important as the welfare of the child. And if she already has done something deceitful, such as have an affair behind his back, and then conceive a child from that affair, that already is such a profound deception that obviously the man is going to react. And in most cases, they want to break up, divorce, and disown the child. And the legislation that we have in place in the West is such that they never want to talk about it in the media because it is so much favoring women with the disguise of keeping the peace and looking out for the interest of the child, and anything that would really serve the purpose of removing accountability from women for their actions. I mean, paternity fraud, if you want to look at the prevalence, the different studies that have been done in, now I'm focusing in the West here, obviously, where the data is potentially more reliable. Paternity fraud can be anywhere between 0.2 to 5%. So it depends a little bit on the culture of how much infidelity plays a role. But we're still talking about something that is 1 in 20, 1 in 30, 1 in 40 children basically are conceived through paternity fraud. So if you say, oh, well, this is not a big deal. Look, anything between 0.5 to 5%, I mean, that's a pretty big part of the population. And therefore, I took the example of the female equivalent to that is grape. I can't say the word without the G because otherwise the algorithm is going to go crazy. But if you want to say what is the prevalence of grape in a Western society, it's potentially in the same ballpark figure, because out of the grapes that are investigated, there's plenty more outside of that that are never reported. So, but this is the comparison I want to make in order for women to help them understand why paternity fraud is such a big deal. So if you're a man and you live in a jurisdiction and you go through the family laws and legislation and rules, make sure before you have kids or you get married is check what does it say about paternity. And if somebody here thinks like, oh well, if you don't trust your wife, then you shouldn't get married. Well, fair enough. At the same time, you might also say, well, why don't we do a rule that when a couple gets married, all of the money that she makes is put into his account? I mean, after all, you get married if you don't trust your husband to use your money wisely. Why'd you get married? And then, of course, I understand people are going to say, well, that's not the same thing. Obviously, but the equivalence I'm trying to make is you cannot pick and choose between I want this when it comes to equality, but when something else doesn't benefit you, it's like, I don't want that. Or you want to have a privilege which is unequal when it benefits you. And when it comes to regulations in terms of paternity and marriage in the West, I mean, marriage rates are plummeting and divorce rates are in the 40 to 50% range. So I find this to be a grave problem that most people don't know about. But yeah, it's something worth considering when having kids and getting married. Let me know in the comment section what you think.